Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Answering the Call of Climate Stewardship with author Heather White. This webinar is presented by republicEn.org. We are conservatives who care about climate change and want to see our conservative leadership take action. My name is Angela, and I'm republicEn's Engagement Director. We're going to start off today's event with a presentation from Heather. Then we're going to have a Q&A session so that everybody can have a chance to ask your own questions. For that Q&A, we ask that you raise your Zoom hand, and one of us from the republicEn team will call on you. If you are a Zoom newbie, you can raise your hand by hitting the React button at the bottom of your screen, just like you can see circled there on our screen. We'll also be monitoring the chat in case you want to drop a question there. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to republicEn's Executive Director and former Congressman Bob Inglis.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you all for joining us. As Angela just said, we're conservatives who care about climate change, and we're out to convince fellow conservatives that they're free enterprise answers. Most of them start with simple accountability. And so it's an important theme of tonight's webinar is stewardship. And so we're very excited to have Heather White with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea, who's going to introduce Heather and start us off.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you, Heather, Angela, Wen, everyone for organizing tonight. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to my friend Heather White. I'm going to do this intro a little bit differently. I will definitely drop her bio in the chat for those who want to see her very impressive list of accomplishments. But instead, right now, I just wanted to focus on how and when we met and show how our lives have intersected over the decades. So as Heather hasn't said anything yet, so she didn't note this. This was when we were chatting beforehand. Heather and I first met when we were both Senate staffers. She for Senator Russ Feingold, and I was staff on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. This was in the 1990s, which I know my adult children refer to as the last century, and I'm sure hers, which are about the same age, do as well. Our bosses were one Democrat, one Republican, and they really intersected on this belief in good government. And thus we partnered on a number of issues, including one, or they partnered on a number of issues, including one that put Heather and I together. And just from the start, she just struck me not only as strategic and determined, but thoughtful and funny. And I really just wanted to be her friend. So as we respectively moved through our careers, our lives continued to intersect. We both left the Senate, working for various nonprofit organizations, including the National Wildlife Federation, where we also had another professional overlap. But then Heather pivoted, making the very smart move to leave the DC area with her family and go to Bozeman, Montana, where she continued to thrive in the conservation space. Yellowstone National Park was lucky to have her advocacy, and in that bio, you will see why. But she's here today in her capacity as an author. She's published 2 books, 60 Days to a Greener Life, Ease Eco-Anxiety Through Joyful Daily Action, which was published last year in 2024, and One Green Thing, Discover Your Hidden Power to Help Save the Planet, which was published in 2022. And both are must-reads for anyone interested in finding their place in efforts to solve climate change. Oh, and she has a TED Talk under her belt too, because of course she does. So with that, I'd love to turn the floor over to my friend of more than 25 years, Heather White.
Chelsea, thank you so much. And just right back at you. I totally wanted to be your friend too when I met you. I mean, I just think something that connects us all is this belief in pragmatism. The term that I've heard a lot is solutions voters. Let's get things done. And that philosophy of let's find common ground, let's compromise, let's not make perfection be the goal here. Let's do what we can for the voters and for our citizens, really just kind of brought us together in this role of conservation, because as everyone on this call also knows, just widespread bipartisan support for clean air, clean water, and public lands too. So it's such an honor to be with you all tonight. I'm thrilled for the opportunity to talk about the call of climate stewardship and service leadership, and how important service leadership is in conservation and in climate action. Angela, thank you in advance for your patience. I haven't updated Zoom. I'm from the 1900s, as Chelsea has reminded you all. I'm from the 1900s, so my Zoom is not updated. So Angela is kindly going to advance the slides for me. So Angela, if you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be great, and we'll just dive in. So my story actually starts. This is a picture of me in the 1900s. This is the 1970s. I'm there. It's my 4th birthday with my grandfather. And I spent a lot of time with my grandfather when I was growing up. I just loved being with him. And one of the things that he would do for me when I spent time with him was that he would bake me an apple pie from scratch. And, I didn't really think a whole lot of it, but what he would do is, I knew it tasted delicious. He would go out into his orchard and he would pick his apples. He would slice up the apples. He would roll out the dough by hand. This was scratch. I didn't even know what scratch cooking was by then. And then he would kind of weave the top of the pie in this beautiful lattice work, and then sprinkle brown sugar, cinnamon on top. And I just knew that this pie was delicious, and it was always great whenever I would go visit him. And about 25 years after he passed, I was apple picking with my kids in Winchester, Virginia. And I was checking out at the old-timey store, my basket of apples kind of overflowing, and I could smell apple pies baking in the store. And that scent transported me back to my grandfather's kitchen. And in that moment, I realized, and tears just started streaming down my face, that he had Parkinson's disease. And it took him several hours to get ready in the morning because buttoning his shirt was so difficult with his tremors. Tying his shoes was really a challenge. But every single time I visited him, he made me this apple pie. And so I realized that this was not just simply a dessert, but it was just this profound gesture of love, of care, and of concern for me. And in that moment, at that, apple picking place in Winchester, I was overcome with this feeling of breathtaking gratitude. And I think all of us have had that moment. And sometimes, maybe you're at checking out at an old-timey store, apple picking, maybe you're in traffic, maybe you're in the grocery store, but we have this moment where we realized how much someone loved us and how much we've taken for granted. And that feeling of gratitude, that feeling of love and abiding love is really what this call of stewardship and climate action is all about. Next slide, please. It is our turn to pay it forward. That kindness, that love, those profound gestures that we've all experienced, whether it be a grandparent or a mentor, a neighbor, people who have cared for us and created opportunities for us to live the life we're leading, is really why we're all focused on service and why we're all focused on conservation and climate action. Next slide, please. One of the things I realized as I was thinking about kind of this intergenerational connection and the importance of love, of gratitude, of service, and of conservation is I started talking to my kids, which Chelsea mentioned. Our kids are similar ages. Mine are 18 and 20. They're both in college now. But when they were in high school, they started telling me how concerned they were about climate action and how, as Generation Z, they really felt alone in climate action. And they were asking me, Mom, where are the baby boomers? Where's Gen X? Where are the millennials? You cannot leave this crisis all on our shoulders. And they very much felt that there was a lot of praise for young people, a lot of opportunities for young people to get involved, but it was very much something that they had to deal with. And it was very funny. I know, Chelsea, you'll appreciate this. I wanted to give them a copy of my resume. I wanted to be like, this is my life's work. I majored in environmental science. I've worked on campaigns. I've, done all kinds of great bipartisan work on conservation, everything from clean water to wetlands to wildlife protections to conservation to clean energy. This is what I do. And I realized that I hadn't been intentional in my conversations with them about what my day-to-day life was like. Our dinner table conversations hadn't been about work. It was more about, what was happening, with them and with the family, and not so much this call to action and this call to service. And so as we started talking about how young people feel about the future that we're leaving them, I realized that I needed to do research into young people's attitudes and how they're feeling about climate action, but that I also needed to create a way for more people to see themselves in climate action and in conservation. I think a lot of people are so overwhelmed by this issue, especially young people. They're not really sure what they should do or how they should do it. And one of the challenges I think we have in the conservation community is that we start the conversation in the wrong place. We start the conversation with the what. Do this, not that. Support this bill, call this member of Congress, buy this car, use this cleaner. And we forget about the most important question when it comes to individual behavior change is the who. And so we need to start beginning our conversations with our community members, with our places of worship, with our neighbors, with the who. Who are you in service? How do you show up for the people you love? And what are you when it comes to your service superpower? So when I started researching individual behavioral psychology and realized that this idea that if you want to change a behavior, if someone connects that to their identity, they're more likely to stick. So if I say, I'm Heather, I'm a swimmer, I'm more likely to swim 3 times a week. But if I say I'm embarking on a new exercise regime where I'm going to exercise 3 times, it's not integrated into my sense of self and identity. So I was inspired by Myers-Briggs. Many of you may know that kind of leadership assessment and strength finders to create my own, but to really ask the question, how do you show up for people? Who are you in service? And I call it your service superpower. And there's 7 different archetypes. Angela, if you could just press the next slide, and then you'll see these 7 different archetypes come up, and I'll just explain a little bit about them. The first is the adventurer who embraces the physicality of the outdoors. They're very important in conservation because they can take people outside of their comfort zone and also help connect them to nature. The second is the beacon, who speaks truth to power. They're the kind that you imagine will be speaking at a hearing, for example, or organizing some type of lecture. You give them a microphone and they're out front talking about it. And they're very important because they help people see what's possible. Then there's the influencer, which my Gen Z kids give me a hard time about. It's not like an influencer in like the social media sense. It's the people person. The person who's like, hey, I think you should come to this webinar tonight. I think you might find it interesting. Or have you seen this really cool article that I'd like to share with you? There's the influencer. And then there's the philanthropist, was a really big term for the giver, the person who shows up by donating their time, they're volunteering, they're donating their resources, they're giving money, they're also providing their network to causes that they care about. Then there's the sage that's focused on the spiritual connection to nature and really making the moral case for climate action. And that's very important, of course, because that can help us break through a lot of the rancor, the political rancor and divisiveness that has been prevalent in the States for a long time. Then there's the spark, which is kind of like the +1 or the cheerleader, the person who's like, sure, I'll go to that lecture. Sure, I'm in. I'm happy to sign that petition. I'll do that. And without a spark, there really isn't a strong movement for change. And then finally, there's the wonk, which comes, of course, from my days in DC called the policy wonk days. But this is the person who loves the facts and the data and the science and can translate it in ways that people can understand. The majority of us in conservation are wonks. So it's really important to try to connect to other aspects of people's personalities and service to help give them context for why they're doing the different behaviors that we're asking them to do as we move forward to try to get different proposals, market-based solutions, you name it, to solve the climate crisis that we're dealing with. Next slide, please. So once you identify what your strengths are in service, how do you show up for the people that you love? I then match you to a daily practice of sustainability. And this is in 60 Days to a Greener Life, my book, which is a little bit like a daily devotional. every chapter is a day where you just do one thing for the planet. It's very simple. It's very scary as someone who's a lawyer and a policy analyst, as Chelsea knows, for me to go out and say, okay, you all, I have this idea. You do one thing every day. But you do, whether it's a call to your member of Congress, whether it's a hike outdoors, whether it's journaling, whether it's writing a letter to your future self, or whether it's switching to a more sustainable brand, or having a conversation with someone that you care about who's interested in knowing more about energy efficiency. All of these individual behaviors can help ease your frustration, ease your anxiety, your stress about where we are, but also can create that culture change. Because one of the things I think we've learned over the past 30 years is the policy can only go so far if we don't have the culture change. And we have to have the culture change that's supporting conservation and sustainability in order for these solutions to stick in the long term. Next slide, please. And this is what's interesting, is that I am not talking about your individual carbon footprint, although I imagine many people on this call are very aware of what your individual carbon footprint is. I think a lot of times people get stuck when they think, oh, I bought this car, but then I started thinking about the life cycle of where does the battery come from, and now I don't know if that's the right choice. This whole idea of a daily practice of sustainability is this driver for culture change. Next little hit. But the good news is that according to Project Drawdown, if we all do it, individual behaviors and household actions can help us get to a 25% reduction of global carbon emissions. So our individual actions do add up. But of course, we have to have systemic change in policies to really drive the emission reduction targets that we need. Next slide. So one of the things I want us to think about is to harken back to that story. For me, it's apple pie. All of us will have a different story where we had that moment where we realized how much someone loved us. And to take that gratitude and pay it forward and think about what can we create for the next generation? How can we create those moments of gratitude for them, whether it's through our daily practice of sustainability, whether it's a new technology that you're helping investing in, whether it's a policy that you're helping pass or to maintain or prevent a rollback. All of these actions really speak to that call of duty, the discipline of having a daily practice of doing one thing every day, not because you brought your reusable water bottle and you have solved the plastics issue, but because you're creating that culture change we need for these long-term visions and long-term thinking to take hold to create a beautiful future for the next generation. Next slide, please. So just here are the books I actually, One Green Thing, 60 Days to a Greener Life. Another book that came out last year is Eco Anxiety, about the mental health impacts that young people are feeling on the climate crisis and the future that we're leaving them. Next slide, please. Here's a QR code to find your service superpower. It's available at onegreenthing.org. It's a 5-minute online quiz if you're interested. I match you then to a daily practice of sustainability based on your strengths of service. Next slide, please. And then here are just some questions to be thinking about, and you'll see these resources in 60 Days to a Greener Life. When you get your results, does your service superpower, does that idea resonate with you? Why or why not? What's your favorite one green thing? Next slide, please. Here's just an overview again of the service superpowers, which I'm happy to provide this deck to the whole team. So Angela, you can forward it as needed. Next slide, please. Here's just a neat exercise I have throughout the books, is just starting to think of ourselves as ancestors and embracing long-term thinking. I will tell you, with groups like this, it's much easier than with the 5th graders that I talk to about being an ancestor and what will your personal legacy to be. But this is just, I think, an opportunity for us to change the conversation from the harms and the suffering of climate, but also what does a greener, healthier, more just future look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And really kind of activating our imagination and creativity in that conversation. Next slide, please. Other things is to think about someone in your past who's created an opportunity for you to live the life you're leading now, and who's helped make you who you are, and kind of take that spirit of honoring them into your service of climate leadership. Next slide, please. Here's a fun exercise that I have as well in 60 Days to a Greener Life is to envision the year 2050 and you're sitting down with a teenager that you're related to. And what will they thank you for? What will they wish you had known? Again, just a creative exercise for you to start thinking about your legacy, your role in service, and your leadership when it comes to climate and conservation. Next slide, please. Here's just a call to action. You can use 60 Days to a Greener Life as a daily devotional for climate action. We also, at One Green Thing, the nonprofit that I started, have intergenerational discussion guides. I will say, I think one of the most important things, folks who really aren't sure what their path is in climate, I know you all have a very clear path, but many of your friends or colleagues may not, is for them to talk to the young people in their lives about how they feel about the future. To a person, it's been a very game-changing conversation when I encourage people to have that conversation. Think of yourself as an awesome ancestor. Think about doing this daily practice, this intention to help shift the culture. Listen to the young people in your life. There's an Eco Impact Top 10 incredible resources that you all already have about how you can make the biggest impact. And of course, please support organizations like republicEn and donate and volunteer to the conservation groups that you love. And that is my presentation. And I'm a fast-talking Southerner, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And if you need me to slow down, you just let me know.
Well, thank you so much for that, Heather. Oh, Bob, you look like you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I'm a slow-talking Southerner, maybe. So I'll ask you a question. Is very interesting that you, Heather, say that you're a wonk, but I'm going to try to turn you into a sage. Okay, you need to be. And I need some sage advice here, and everybody on this team needs some advice. You mentioned the divisiveness and polarization, and I wonder if when we talk in terms of people taking action, it seems that quite often what people that we're after, right of center people, what they perceive is an attack on their way of life somehow. They feel that they've been put to be the one that's to blame for the climate crisis. And of course, then the problem becomes, if you have guilt without redemption, there's paralysis, right? And so, because people don't have a way of getting out of that spot where they're the guilty ones. Any advice as a sage? We need some sage advice here about how you overcome that and make it so that people feel that we in the climate space are not attacking them, telling them that it's their fault, but rather, hey, we're all in this together or something. Any advice on that?
Such a great question, Bob. And I think the most important thing is that people are afraid of being judged. They're afraid of being judged. I think we need to acknowledge that none of us caused the situation that we're in right now, but we're all part of the solution. So when you say that we're all in it together, I think it's really important. I think it's also important to move in close and make sure everybody knows that you don't have to be all things to all people, right? You don't have to be an expert on EV battery storage to be part of what we're talking about, which is having more climate solutions. You don't have to be an expert in drafting legislation, or everyone has a unique role and you can fit in the way that works for you. I think the other thing is that it's not all or nothing. A lot of times people get this freeze response, fear of being judged. I had many people say to me, I live in Bozeman, Montana. People are like, Heather, I have an SUV. Can you even have lunch with me? And I'm like, yes, we live in Montana. I bet you have four-wheel drive and snow tires too. Yeah, of course we can have that conversation. I think moving in close, knowing that it's not all or nothing, and that when we each do our part, and it's not transformational that day, but we are going to reach a tipping point where the culture, and certainly young people, and poll after poll, this is one of their top 5 issues, climate is, across the board. I mean, 4-H, which I know you all know 4-H, 85% of 4-Hers say that climate is in the top 3 issues. facing them in the future. So young people want to see solutions, and we don't have to do, like, we don't all have to be vegan, right? I mean, again, I live in Montana. You can imagine how people are nervous about hanging out with me. And I'm like, no, it's okay. It's not all or nothing, but we can have this conversation and create opportunities for change. So I think the openness is important. I think the judgment-free zone is important. I think tapping into the sage, and for me, that is thinking about the spirituality of connecting to nature, of being a steward of God's creation. And depending on the person, some people are uncomfortable having that conversation with me. I'm very comfortable with it because it is what motivates me. And I think the other thing is this idea of being an awesome ancestor. I think when we start having that conversation, like, for example, I'm from Tennessee. So when I say I'm a fast talking Southern, I'm from East Tennessee. And obviously coal was a really important part of the experience of East Tennessee. A lot of coal and copper mines where I'm from. And, I get questions from people who are connected to those industries saying, you don't judge me. And I've said, look, those industries did create who we are as a country, but the technology is outdated, right? And are those the jobs that you want your grandchildren having? Like, I know the sacrifices that you made in order to have these incredible opportunities. And I think there's ways to have very respectful, open conversations that are based on shared values. But I'm sure there's other people on the call that have a lot to say about that too.
One funny thing that I wanted to say, and then I have something more serious I wanted to say, but when you were walking through the different types of powers, and you noted that most of the people that work in the environmental community are wonks, the first thing I thought of is this is why they have been unsuccessful, because they don't have diversity in their power, right? So they're all very hyper-focused on analyzing the solution. And this is why we always lose. And I remember working on, cover your ears, Bob, at the cap and trade bill in 2000, 3, 5, 7, 8. And I don't remember at what point Senator Inhofe called it cap and tax. And even though that is really what it is, I mean, cap and trade in its most bare form is a carbon tax, right? You're capping and then you're charging for any emissions above the cap. But it stuck, right? And it was a great piece of propaganda because people are afraid of a tax. And so to try to explain why we thought it was something different, you had to write a dissertation, or the inclination was to write a dissertation to counter what Senator Inhofe was saying. Whereas, I don't know, I think if you have a little bit more variety in who is pursuing action, then you let the people that are the influencers or the beacons or the sage have the conversation, and let the wonks do what the wonks are good at. So that was my funny thing that I wanted to say. And then on a more serious note, my kids are a little older than yours, so 24 and 21. And likewise, they don't always look at my resume and give me the acknowledgement for the efforts made over the last, decades of my life. But one thing that my best friends have a son who's 19, and I'm at their house a lot for dinner, and my kids were already in college and he was still in high school. So he was hanging out with the old people a lot. And he one day came to dinner and he said, it's pointless. Like, we only have 8 years left on this earth. And I was like, okay, slow down. What is going on up there, right? And I ended up giving him a copy of One Green Thing and the 60-day devotional, because I could tell that he was just so overwhelmed. Climate change is such a big global problem. And he's seen himself as one person who at that time felt like he didn't have any power. He's just a high school student. What is he going to do? And I feel like those books really empowered him. And he is now studying to be a sustainable urban planner. So you and your writing helped motivate him. So, I think a lot about this, about the being a good ancestor and this burden that we have left on this generation to fix things. So how do we speed up the process? How do we get more people kind of engaging with what their superpower is because together we can definitely do this. Alone we cannot. So what's your advice? How do we speed things up?
Well, Chelsea, thank you so much for sharing both of those stories. And also just saying that, the young person was inspired and is now studying sustainability. I do believe in Project Drawdown, which I refer to a lot in the book, does say that every job is going to be a climate job. I think there's an incredible opportunity with sustainability. There's an incredible economic, even, we can talk Inflation Reduction Act and what happened, what didn't happen, but globally, that is where we're headed. I mean, the fossil fuels are finite. It is a little bit like doubling down on VHS tapes. I know analog is coming back with the cool kids, but it's an outdated technology and it's finite. And the fossil fuel companies know that too, which is why they're energy companies. So we can get there. How do we speed it up? Wow, I have such a very basic answer to that, and I'd love to hear what other people have to say. My perspective is through connection, conversation, and community. I just feel like I speak to a lot of faith-based communities. They're really drawn to this. So I've been having a really interesting. The Lutherans love me, so I'm speaking to a lot of Lutheran congregations. But I think a lot of people are missing third spaces. I'm sure many of you are familiar with third spaces, and if you're not connected to, a faith community, my grandparents, for example, were big bowlers. They had their bowling league, but fewer and fewer young people are having these third spaces and community where they can have conversations like this in real life or digitally. I am seeing more and more they're sewing together or having repair workshops or thrifting, but I feel like community conversation and connection is what's going to help speed it up, and to let kids know that it's not too late. We have all of the solutions. What's missing is the political will, and the political will comes from, and I think Bob really touched on this, removing judgment, moving in close, finding shared values, and focusing on, and then we move to the Wonk, right? Here's the solution, but we can get there. And I think there's also some type of optimism, but I'd love to get your thoughts. And Bob, I'm sure you have thoughts on how do we make this move faster?
Well, yeah, one of our contentions or observations, I guess I should say, is that it might be solution aversion is what we often deal with in talking to our intended audience. If I don't have a solution that fits with my values or that I think is practical, then I tend to doubt the existence of the problem. It sounds irrational, but it is what all of us do in order to cope. If you think there's just something like death and taxes that you can't avoid, then if climate change is in that basket of death and taxes, that's a bad place for it to be. We need for it to be in a place where, oh yeah, there are solutions. There are things we can do. And of course, what we like to say to conservatives, and I like what Deb has just put in the chat about, there are many conservatives, right-of-center people who care about the environment. It is true. And what we need to say to them is, in addition to all that, you know what? We're going to make a lot of money at it if we just do this right. We're going to create a lot of wealth. We're going to light up the world with more energy, more mobility, more freedom. It's just going to be better, cleaner, and cheaper if we do it right. And wow, it's going to be pretty exciting. It's not doom and gloom. And so, solution aversion we find is something that we're constantly having to sort of unpack, and say, there are some solutions. Oh, yes, there are. And they're pretty exciting, right? Then people can engage.
Bob.
Well, and Bob, I think you're fond of saying too that lawmakers don't lead, they follow.
Yeah, yes, I hope I'm not bursting any bubbles on this call. Okay, let me not. I hope I'm not sending anybody to counseling with this comment. Yes, politicians typically follow; they don't lead. It's a very rare bird in politics who actually leads. Usually, what happens when you lead is you get shot in the back by your own people. Because you stepped out of line, for goodness sakes. So that'll usually do you in. But solution aversion, I hope we can convince people that, there are really some exciting solutions here. It's really pretty great.
I think that is a really key, Bob, is that one of the things that because I speak, like I said, I'm from Tennessee, I speak to a lot of faith-based groups, and people get a little nervous sometimes, when they bring me in. Even though I'm from Bozeman, I feel like Tennessee and Montana would give me a lot of cred.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. And one of the things that I think people are afraid of is that this idea of conservation or climate action is a taking away rather than an added to. And so what you just talked about is a greener, healthier future with more freedom, more mobility, an opportunity to increase wealth, to increase our quality of life. And I think that there is a call to action for all of us to start painting that picture. What does the healthier, greener future look like? I mean, young people want to see it. They get like so much of young adult fiction, I'm sure you all know, is apocalyptic, right? It is. It's like the zombies are going to happen just right around the corner. But this alternative of what does this healthier, greener future look like? I think that we could do more trying to paint that picture and helping them understand the incredible opportunity that is in front of us if we can embrace it and embrace these solutions.
Yeah, I was in New York City recently, and I was walking down the street. It just occurred to me, wouldn't it be great if our grandkids say, "Can you believe they used to breathe that air?" I mean, these trucks, going by, and these internal combustion cars. I mean, it's just foul air that I was breathing in New York City. And I think it's going to be sort of like, I'm old enough to have had a grandmother who probably did ride in, let me think I've got this right. I think I've got this right. Would ridden in horse-drawn carriages when she was a child, right? So we think, isn't that crazy? Can you believe that people actually had to ride around in horses and carriages and such? Yeah, they did. And yeah, we breathe this stinky air. And then they're going to be saying, wow, isn't it something that now we don't do that anymore? That's pretty exciting. If we can be one of those ancestors you're talking about that brings about that future, there was a Henry Ford that got the car going, and so we can be the ones that sort of get this bring in this future where you don't have stinky air walking down the street in New York City.
Bob, I love that. And I will just share a brief story. And that is my mom went to the University of Tennessee, which is where I went to law school in Knoxville, of course. Go Vols, I have to say that. Even though who knows, I don't know what your allegiances are, but go Vols. But one of the things she talked about is during the day, in the late 60s, early 70s, she would often have to turn on her lights and the windshield wipers because of all of the soot from the coal-fired plants right around the university. And there was also a creek that she called Stinky Creek, and my mom has this beautiful Southern accent. And I was like, Mom, can you spell that? I am not familiar with that name. And she was like, no, honey, it was stinky. It was so polluted, and now it's not, because these laws that were passed, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act in that time period, late 60s, early 70s, made such a difference. And I think there's an opportunity for older generations like us to let young people, like Chelsea was saying, this, young man that she was hanging out with, we've seen incredible change in our lifetime, not even our grandparents, but in our lifetime. And so projecting that forward and thinking, I love that story of that we can be the ancestors where we can say, remember when, but we even now can say, remember when, and we've witnessed so much positive change in our lifetime.
Yeah, it's so true. Max, you got a question there, I think.
Hi, Bob. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Heather. I feel obligated to say something because Montana keeps getting mentioned, and I'm from Montana. So A, and B, I need to defend the western part of Tennessee because my daughter went to Vanderbilt and the Commodores. But all joking aside, a lot of what you say resonates with me, and it just gives me more energy to keep doing what I'm doing. And so I thank you for that. I guess I do a couple things here. I treat all my conversations, we talk about sports, we talk about the weather, and I talk about climate. It's just sort of natural for me. Every single conversation, there's an element of the climate. Like with my conservative friends here in Montana, they're fisher people. what do you think about all this algae in the river? And the fish aren't as easy to catch because they're heated up, or the games move further up the mountain. They're harder to find during hunting season. So I always try to find something that on the climate side that is conversational, not adversarial. And then the other thing is we have a monopoly utility here called Northwestern Energy, and they're always in the news. So it's really easy for me to say, gosh, I invested in Northwestern 10 years ago and I made $2 on my $100 investment. If I put it in Nextera, I would have made $250. It's just they're not with the times in terms of the renewable, and to Bob's earlier point about wealth generation. And then the third thing, I try to do this as much as possible in front of their kids. And then I don't engage the parents, I engage the kids. Hey, Heather, do you have any questions about this, or do you agree with what I'm saying? And then they get into the conversation and sort of sideswipes the parents a little bit. So, you said all of these things. I just want to share my examples because maybe that motivates other people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. I think sometimes people are a little reluctant or nervous, but your approach, again, is non-judgmental, interesting. It is just like the weather or sports. And I think that it sticks with people. And it opens a conversation, opens a door for people to think about behavior change, different investments, et cetera. And Big Sky is beautiful. I'm in Bozeman. I'm in Big Sky all the time. So I'm sure our paths will cross.
I read this article today that reminds me so much of everything that is being said here, and also something that Shannon dropped in the chat about the book Abundance, which I also read earlier this year. And that is that all these solutions just add, right? We don't have to take things away. The market will take things away when they no longer make economic sense, such as Bob talked about his grandmother riding in the horse and buggy. Once Ford made the cars and cars became affordable for everybody, horse and buggies kind of went by the wayside. The article I read today was about using waste heat and turning it into industrial steam. And there's a startup that has this technology that they believe so much in, that they are going to the manufacturers and saying, we will install our technology for free, and then you split your energy savings with us, because to make the industrial steam is so energy intensive, it's costly for the old energy bill. And I read that and I thought, that's remarkable. You believe so much in what you're doing. You're going to just put it out there. You're going to reap back the benefits because you know that company, that factory is going to save money. And at some point, if it works, right, then those industrial boilers will be the archaic thing and their technology will be kind of the winner, so to speak. But it's not really choosing winners and losers, which we hear all the time in DC. Don't choose winners and losers. It's just letting the two technologies go head to head. And the reason why they keep the old ones installed is because they're like, if you're not seeing any energy savings, or you need to use natural gas to make your industrial steam, then you seamlessly switch over and use your technology. But I just thought that was a really beautiful example of everything that we have said here tonight.
Hey, Chelsea, we have a comment or question from Brian in the chat. He says he lives in Western Colorado, and we keep speaking about a call to action in general terms. And he wants to know exactly what it is that people can do to get involved. He says he likes what he's hearing so far.
Well, that's a question for Heather.
Thank you, Angela. And thank you, Brian. What I spoke about was this idea of service leadership. And I call it a service superpower. It's a little bit like Myers-Briggs or Strength Finders. This idea that when we talk about climate and conservation, a lot of times we start the conversation with the what instead of the most important question, which is the who. Who are you? What do you want your legacy to be? What are your strengths? What are your talents? How do you want to apply them? Because not everybody is going to be able to wax as eloquent as Chelsea does about this new boiler technology. That's not necessarily in everybody's DNA to do that. Some folks aren't comfortable talking about investments that they've made in monopoly utilities, whereas other people might want to say, hey, I'm really worried about my grandkids' future, and start the conversation there. And so my work and my books, and I do have a small nonprofit that I started called One Green Thing. The idea is you discover who are you in service. There's 7 different archetypes. And then based on your talents and service, how you show up for the people you love, you then do this daily practice of sustainability, a one green thing each day, not because you're going to solve the climate crisis by plugging in your EV car or finding a great carbon offset or by using a reusable water bottle, but because your daily practice can help shift the culture. And we need to have the culture change for the policy solutions and market solutions to work. So that's just kind of the idea. The call to action is to think about, what your legacy is, what you want it to be, how you can be an awesome ancestor, how you can kind of embrace that gratitude for people who've created opportunities for you to live the life you're leading, how you carry that forward in this daily practice, and how we continue to have these important conversations where we move in close and we focus on values and who you are, and then start talking about the solutions.
I know that the slide with the QR code to take the quiz to determine your climate superpower was just up very briefly, but I'm wondering if anybody either got a chance to get in there and has already determined what their superpower profile is, because I'd be very curious to know. When I first read your book, which I just pulled up off my bookshelf, and I have all these little notes that places where I saved pages and highlighted and stuff, but I started the influencer because apparently at the time I thought I was an influencer, but as I'm reading it, I'm now thinking maybe I'm a little bit more of a beacon. So I think you probably can evolve too with time in terms of what you become, and what your power is. And I think people can grow more confident in speaking publicly over time, where that might be something when you start, right off the bat that you're not really interested in doing, and you're more having the one-on-one conversations. I can't speak for Bob. I don't know if he was born able to talk to crowds of people or if that was a skill that you honed, but I would be curious if anyone got a quick chance to explore what they think they might be.
And I did put it in the chat at One Green Thing. If you just scroll a little bit down, you'll see just where you can jump up and take the quiz. It takes about 5 minutes.
And were you an influencer, Heather? Was that your...
I am a philanthropist, which is actually one of the rarer different archetypes. So I'm the giver and the wonk. It depends on the day, because I love talking about all my...
Yeah. I also want to know if your kids are now impressed with your resume. Have you done enough?
Yeah, that's great, Mom, whatever. But no, I keep hoping. I just recently this weekend, I did another TEDx talk that I just thought you all might find interesting. It was actually inspired by a lot of marketing research for retirement investment companies. And the idea was meeting your future self. And so there's a UCLA professor in the marketing department, and like TIAA or TIA is one of his big clients. And he has found that people are more likely to save money for retirement if they look at a realistic aged photo of themselves. And if they have a visual of what their future self is going to be like, they're more likely to be aligned and take long-term actions. And so I kind of applied it to this idea of climate action and aged a photo. I took a TikTok filter and aged myself in the presentation, but I'll send it to you once it goes live. But it was so interesting because for me, it seems like an obvious connection to climate and to service leadership and what are you doing for the next generation. But it really came from the retirement savings world. Very fun.
Heather, I have a
There was
question
a
for
question.
you.
Oh, go ahead, Angela. Go ahead.
I have a question for you that sort of piggybacks off of another question that's in the chat. I know that you have been for weeks now, like traveling all over the country, doing all these different talks to all these different kinds of groups. And I'm wondering, do you ever talk to groups at like the EPA or the USDA? Like have you had people be receptive to you in sort of those government factions?
So interesting. I haven't since January been invited to talk to those groups. I think people are a little nervous about what words to use to talk about climate, whether it's USDA or EPA. I will say that not a lot, but several Fortune 500 companies have asked me to speak and talk to their teams. I'm talking to Ziff Davis, which is a publications, like a publishing group, next week at a summit that they have about purpose. Also working with a UK company, interesting, kind of like the staples of the UK. It's called Lyrico, and they're very interested in how they can use this idea of how we all have these different strengths and service with their leadership teams, so everyone can be aligned in sustainability even if you do HR. And I think that's one of the things that young people immediately resonate with. I have a very fun a fun game that I play with junior high school. I say junior high school because I'm a 80s kid, but middle school kids is kind of stump the expert. And so they have to name a job that they think is not in sustainability, and then I tell them why it is. So it's really fun. Like a lot of times they're like, I'm going to be a professional football player. And I'm like, okay, well, how are you going to get to where you need to practice, right? Are you going to take a plane? So you should be thinking about that impact. How are you going to practice and make sure it's not too hot? How are you going to be using your social media influence? What causes are you going to be connected with? So it's just a really fun exercise for them to think about it. But no, I haven't really met with many government groups, even though that's my background, but more for-profit entities and not just sustainable companies, pretty, broad ranging interests.
Yeah, I think it really is upon us to weigh in with the lawmaker, the policymakers, right? And then I'm sure the government's been closed for 51 days. I have a few friends that were back to work today. So it was really surreal that, it's almost like everybody in your office went on vacation at the same time, and now you're all back on the same day. And what do you do? But, I'm not sure that these conversations would necessarily, this is the best time to be having them there, but if we have them in our homes and we have them in our communities and our schools and our churches and wherever you like to hang out, then it will filter up, right? It will filter up. And, I think talking even to your local leaders I find local action to be so much more satisfying right now because you can see the change much more immediately than you can at the national level. And that's not to say we work on the national level stuff every day, and that's super important, but that's more, my old boss, John Warner, used to say it was like trying to turn a battleship, right? It doesn't happen fast, but at the local level, you can definitely see progress happen a lot faster. So if anyone needs that like quick hit, I would definitely recommend doing that.
Yeah. Heather, we're at the Center for Climate Change Communication at George Mason University. And Ed Maybach and Tony Lacerowitz have done some interesting research, with global warming 6 Americas, with 6 personality types, they say, that describe the waterfront of climate action, from alarmed Alice to dismissive Dan. And what they say they find is that if you increase the sense of efficacy, I can do something, you get more engagement out of all 6 of those Americas because there's a sense that you can do something about it. And so I suppose that's what your One Green Thing is about, is giving people this thing, and that's significant. And then Jeffrey has a comment in the chat that basically brings up the flip side of that, or the thing that's the thing we've got to address if we want to get climate action, which is basically scalability. Is sort of implicit in his question. Is what he says that the fossil fuel industry has to be the loser here. Yeah, unless they can find another way to do something, they're really good at drilling. And they're really geothermal opportunities. But here's the thing. Those 6 Americas, probably most of us don't see a future for us in drilling, for geothermal energy. I mean, we figure that's probably going to take somebody with a lot of capital. A small mom and pop company like ExxonMobil maybe could do that. But not us. So how do you match those things where you have these things that we can all do, one green thing, and then this sense that some things really do take enormous scalable effort, like transforming the oil and gas industry into the geothermal industry. which it could do. They could do that. But I don't know. What do you? How do you address that those two sides of the coin, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's both, Bob. I think that people do need to be able to exercise agency over this overwhelming issue, and we have to have these completely new ways of thinking. We have to have investments in clean energy, like on the scale that we've invested in oil and gas, which we've all talked about. Like there need to be market incentives for all this to happen, incredible opportunities for entrepreneurs. So we need to have the systems change too. And I think this is changing, and it has been changing over the last 5 years, I would say. But a lot of times, younger people especially would be like, what does it even matter if I took the metro? And so the reason it matters is if you're doing it intentionally, is that you're shifting the culture. And I think we've seen, I'm just thinking about someone who I was motivated to go to University of Virginia and study environmental science because I read Earth and the Balance in 1992, right? And in 1992, I was so excited about all the opportunities. Bam, Kyoto, bam, we had like all these huge international agreements about climate and moving forward and huge bipartisan support for this change. And culturally, we're not there anymore. And so I think we have to do both, have the conversations about the big solutions. We all come together to talk about these solutions and figure them out while we're shifting the culture in that direction.
Yeah, and get a copy of Chelsea's book about that, all of those things.
Bob, brilliant book, Glacial. What a great title, right? What a great title to talk about the challenges that we have to getting those solutions.
Yeah.
I was driving in my car today, and speaking of cultural change, which we've talked a lot about today, the car in front of me, we were at, stoplight. Light turns green, the car starts to take off, and they throw a can out their window. And I had not seen somebody litter like that in so long. I almost just like stopped in traffic because it was so startling to me. Luckily, there was no oncoming traffic to hit it, but I just thought, wow. So a lot of what we were, in probably when we were things, that was much more common, right? People just put their trash everywhere. And then at some point we became cleaner and cleaned up after ourselves. And so I just see this as a much bigger scale of cultural change that needs to occur.
Yeah. So true. I see we're almost out of time, but Heather, there's that one question left about any suggestions about getting the audience to value natural world more than dollars?
Such a great question. I think we have to connect kids to nature. Huge challenge. Kids are plugged up to their devices up to 8 to 10 hours a day. So creating those opportunities where we have intergenerational experiences in the outdoors is how we can start changing what that value is. Peer-reviewed literature shows if you have a meaningful outdoor experience with an adult who you care about, who's a mentor by age 11, you're more likely to have a lifelong conservation ethic. So that's one of the first things I would suggest. And I think Gunnar has a question. I'm not sure if we have time. So Angela, you let me know.
Yep, go for it. Yeah.
I like to bring the conversation back to the sage part and more on a personal level. In our family, we are relatively green. We do a lot of things, and I'd like to do more. But my partner is not convincible by me, the Wonk, with lots of facts and rational arguments. So we haven't invested in a bunch of things, such as an EV, that I would like to invest in. So I wonder if you have any one-on-one advice on how to convince that most other in your life.
Oh, what a great question. I think it would be really interesting to see kind of what their profile might be when it comes to service. But if it is a sage or if it is an influencer, maybe they exercise about being an awesome ancestor. What do we want our legacy to be? What do we think, 20 years from now, the young people that we know and love, what will the world be like? What will the role that we played, what will that be? What are we investing in? Because our money is a reflection of our values. So what are our values long term? And just that exercise of thinking about it being 2050 and you're sitting down with a young person and what are they going to wish you had known? And what will they thank you for? That might be something that might be too, out there, but I just think I have found it to be very helpful in this idea of your future selves. What will your future selves, it's hard to think about, how you save over 20 years. But if you're looking at an image of your future self, it's pretty interesting. So that might be something to think about too.
We are a minute over time. So I believe we're going to bid you adieu for the night, Heather. It was great having you here with us. And I was so glad that we were able to make this connection.
Thank you.
Can we say hi to Junie? Hi, Junie.
Hi, Junie. And Bob and Angela, Wen and Chelsea, thank you so much for having me. And everybody, thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to be part of this conversation. Just really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
A heads up for everybody that's on the call today. Over the next day or two, you will get an email from me that will have a link to tonight's recording, because I know we did have someone ask about that in the comments.
Thanks, everybody. Special thanks to Heather. Thanks so much. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.